Hello, welcome back to Bonaventure Time. Today I want to take a little bit of time to just talk about von Hildebrand and put him in relation to Immanuel Kant. I talked about this a little bit in my introduction to value philosophy video, kind of what Kant's influence was on von Hildebrand, or in a way a more antithesis of a influence for von Hildebrand in responding to Kant rather than adopting his thought. But I just had some people ask me, what is like von Hildebrand's relation to Kant? Because in his Epistemology, it seems like he agrees with Kant in many things. So I just want to take this time to make this video and kind of just put von Hildebrand into perspective in relation to Immanuel Kant. And I think it really starts with his ethics. I know I've already made a couple videos just kind of explaining von Hildebrand's ethics, his affective response, his value response, right? He creates objectivity in a phenomenological experience by responding. The human person transcends, right, out of themselves to give an object their due response. So there's some objectivity, right, in von Hildebrand, and that already puts him in distinction to many modern philosophers, so to speak. But in his ethics, and I've mentioned this before, what puts him in such deep contrast is, for Kant, right, in the beginning of metaphysics, the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, right, his qualification for an ethics is goodwill without qualification, right? So it has to be something devoid of emotions. It has to be something, right, devoid of subjectively satisfying motivations, to use Hildebrandian terms, right? And for Kant, right, that means it has to pursue things, right, with just a pure will in something, right, that I wouldn't say transcends out of itself like von Hildebrand, but for Kant, something that's grounded in something that can become a maxim universal law, right? Something of which the will conforms to in a sort of duty-bound sense, not necessarily in a transcendent sense, right? This is in contrast with von Hildebrand, right? For Hildebrand, he doesn't deny that there's an obligation to do the ethical laws. But for him, right, you do see that transcendence in value response, right? Whether it's a theoretical response, a volitional response, or an affective response, right? And you would find these in chapter 17 of his Ethics, right? And this is in deep distinction, as I'm saying, right? Because for Hildebrand, it's encountering objects in experience, right? That is him as phenomenologist. But him with a more like scholastic background, you could say, in encountering objects and their essence, so to speak, the logos, as Hildebrand likes to say himself, right? You are not conforming the world to your own mind, like Kantian transcendental idealism. You are rather responding to an object and giving it its due, right? For example, Hildebrand loves to talk about this in The Heart and the Nature of Love, right? When I give mournful tears to something, or to someone who has passed away, right, I'm not conforming them to my mind. I'm actually responding and giving them their due. The raison d'être, right, as he would say, of the emotion finds its objectivity in the object it's responding to. And so in that way, you're transcending your own subjectively satisfying motivations, and it becomes a value response. And that's really at the heart. I already kind of talked a bit about this in my introduction to value philosophy. That's like the heart of von Hildebrandian ethics, right? It's objective, unlike Kantian subjective universality, and you transcend out of yourself. That is what von Hildebrand loves about morality, is this transcendence in humanity, but also an immanence to human action, right? Which kind of echoes the acting person of Kara Wojtyła, right? So that's one distinction in the realm of ethics between von Hildebrand and Kant, this transcendence versus this conformity to the law through duty, right? But one thing that is similar to Kant, for von Hildebrand, that he does adopt is Kant makes this distinction between obligations, what he calls hypothetical obligations and formal obligations. And again, this is in the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals. And for Kant, right, there are some things that are just, by their very nature, obligatory in a very formal sense, in the, right, for example, one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill. Whereas there are hypothetical obligations, such as if-then propositions, right? So if you want, say, for just an example, like, say, if you want a well-cooked chicken, you have to cook the chicken, right? There's this sort of obligations that presuppose a certain what if or if-then scenario, right? If you want to live, you have to eat, right? There's that certain obligation, but it's more of a hypothetical, right? So it's not as categorical in Kantian terms, so to speak. And Hildebrand actually finds that this is something that weighs a certain merit. He actually ends up adopting this in his ethics. I believe it's chapter 18 or chapter 20, one of those chapters for von Hildebrand in his ethics that you would find this adoption. And he thinks it's a necessary one because it kind of shows the different layers of ethical responses and the weight, so to speak, of different objective value responses. So that is something for von Hildebrand. I don't want to make it sound like von Hildebrand just shows that Kant's the worst moral philosopher. No, von Hildebrand found Kant actually to be a very great moral philosopher. He actually one time was walking with one of his students and actually said that. He said Kant was a great moral philosopher. But von Hildebrand, bringing in his Catholic background, thought that Kant needed grace to really see the eyes of the beauty of morality in a deeper sense. So there are certainly some things that he adopts. There's a lot that he opposes, right? And you see that in his ethics, right? In that value response and transcendence. Okay, so that's his ethics. Now going into aesthetics, what is different for von Hildebrand? And the reason I started with the ethics, right, in value responses, really that sets the tone for how von Hildebrand kind of overcomes this Kantian idealism, right? So for Kant, beauty is not in the eye of the beholder, as David Hume would say, but for Kant in his aesthetics, and I've talked about this in Analytic of the Sublime a little bit, right? He has the judgment of taste. We all have these faculties, understanding and imagination, and because we all share in this, then we can set forth a beautiful object in hoping that we can all respond to it in the same way, right? We can all recognize the beauty of this because we have the same faculties. So theoretically, what I claim as beautiful, other persons could claim as beautiful as well. And that's kind of Kant's response to finding out how people find different things beautiful. He says it's according to the different levels of taste and the development of the taste and imagination and understanding. But for Kant, right, that makes beauty something not fully objective. It's something he would say is subjectively universal, right? There's sort of the subjective experience, but I can make it universal, grounded on the faculties that we all share in common, and it's just this development of taste. For von Hildebrand, he differs very much so, and again, it's in that value response, right? He thinks beauty is something that is a value response, right? There's this value response to the landscape that is beautiful, to the painting that is beautiful, to the beloved that is beautiful, right? So you're responding to objective qualities, and again, it's that transcendence out of oneself, right, that leads to this. And he talks about this in his Aesthetics, chapter 2, and his Ethics, actually, as well, chapters 1 through 3, right, where the value causes the feeling that we feel, right? So this is his way of defeating Hume, Kant, right? It's not something subjective. The feeling is caused through the value, right? Whereas in a subjectively satisfying category for von Hildebrand, if you're not familiar with that, I would check out my intro to value philosophy. But right, if you're looking to subjectively satisfying, something derives value insofar as it pleases me, right? But with a value, it's the opposite. The feeling is derived from the value that causes it, right? And in this way, von Hildebrand says it's the same with beauty, right? The beauty causes the feeling that I'm feeling. It is wholly nonsensical to say that my feeling is sublime. No, it is the sky that is sublime that causes this feeling in me, right? So that's one way of von Hildebrand kind of distinguishes himself from Immanuel Kant. Another way is von Hildebrand doesn't think we can come to know the full meaning of beauty. This is something that he develops in his frontal and lateral consciousness. Frontal consciousness being really equivalent to intentionality in phenomenology, where I am conscious of the object and we are conscious of objects of beauty. But for von Hildebrand, lateral consciousness comes in at this point, where in lateral consciousness, he says we can come to reflect. There's a self-consciousness and a self-reflection, right? So say I am conscious of the beloved. In lateral consciousness, I can reflect on myself and come to know what it means, not just to love and to be conscious of a beloved, but to actually know what it means to love, what it means, right, in the definition of love, of willing to good, receiving that good, being self-gift, right, or for von Hildebrand, right, the affective response in receiving that, right, the intentio unionis. But he doesn't think we have that for beauty, right? While we can have frontal consciousness, we can't really have lateral consciousness. I can't know what it means to find the meaning of beauty. Beauty has this certain mysterious aura to it, as von Hildebrand would say. So that's one of the differences in von Hildebrand and Kant, and how he distinguishes himself in that realm, in the realm of aesthetics. I'll end with this one, because I feel like philosophical anthropology could be summed up as von Hildebrand finds a deep place in the heart, and I've made videos on that already discussing that, so I won't go into that. The last one that I want to distinguish Immanuel Kant and von Hildebrand is epistemology, so to speak, the study of knowledge, right? And actually, this is one where they look deceivingly very close, because von Hildebrand in his book What is Philosophy defends an a priori synthetic knowledge. Actually, all phenomenologists do, but they dangerously look Kantian in that, and von Hildebrand himself, and he defends Kant, the defense of a priori synthetic, but there's actually a way he sets himself in contradistinction to Kant. And I want to draw that out, and this is really, I'm building off of What is Philosophy, chapter 5. For Immanuel Kant, though, we'll start with him. He thinks there's three judgments. There are analytical judgments and synthetic judgments. Analytical judgments would be a priori analytics. So he would simply say, right, like that the bachelor is an unmarried man. The predicate of that in scholastic terms is contained in the subject term, right? So you learn nothing new, right? It's something independent of experience, so to speak. But you learn nothing new, right? The bachelor presupposes that he is an unmarried man. In his very definition, you can derive the predicate, right? That is an analytical judgment. Now, for a synthetic judgment, right, it's something where you learn something new, but it's built empirically, right? A posteriori. Synthetic judgments are something built empirically. You learn through empirical experiences, and you learn new things, but in this way, it is not independent of experience. It is not prior, right? It is posterior. It is something that is dependent upon empirical experiences. So those are two judgments for Kant, but he actually thinks there's a third judgment. And for him, this is the a priori synthetic. I actually did make a video on this, so I won't spend too much time on it. But what essentially it is it's taking both of those, an a priori judgment, something independent of experience, but actually learn something new. And how is this possible? He thinks it's in like Euclidean geometry, right? 3 plus 7 equals 10, right? That is something independent of experience. But you actually do learn something new, because the essence of 10 does not necessarily break down to 3 plus 7. It could break down to 2 times 5, 9 plus 1, 8 plus 2, right, etc. And so we actually have something posited new of the essence of 10 that we did not know according to empirical experience. Now, Kant limits this to Euclidean geometry. This is what von Hildebrand would say is the biggest mistake Kant made. He thinks it's only found in Euclidean geometry. But von Hildebrand thinks that the a priori synthetic is actually all around. It's in the moral life. It's in different metaphysical propositions. He thinks kind of the starting point of a priori synthetic is the principle of non-contradiction. Something cannot be and not be at the same time. Or did I just say the same thing? Something cannot be and not be at the same time. Right? He thinks moral values presupposes a person is an a priori synthetic. And there's other examples he would use, right? And what's Hildebrand's defense? Is he just adopting a Kantian? Even though he extends it to everything, is he adopting a Kantian? Well, I want to argue he's not, and I want to actually go back from chapter 5 and explore that more. I won't open up the text, but to kind of give you a brief overview, von Hildebrand talks about 3 kinds of unities in this. I want to argue that von Hildebrand is not focusing on judgments. He's not focusing on the idea of independent of experience, though he does mention that. What's really at the heart of Hildebrand's a priori synthetic is the essence. He's focusing more on the essence of the objects rather than my judgment on the object, like Kant is, right? And he finds this according to 3 unities. He calls them chaotic and accidental unities, genuine unities, and necessary unities. For chaotic and accidental unities, these are unities that are more constructed, von Hildebrand says, according to our imagination. Take, for example, a forest. A forest is a unity of, it's a whole built off the unity of different trees, yet it's not really constructed in and of itself. You kind of have to imagine the unity of the forest together. Von Hildebrand uses an example of tones and melodies, right? You have to really construct and imagine that unity to be unified, right? It's something dependent on myself in some way, to construct that unity. And in this way, he calls it the lowest kind of unity, right? And this could be compared to, right, the analytical judgments, right? This is something, right, that's not necessarily the same as saying the predicate is contained within the subject, but there's a certain dependence on the subject. And in this way, in this essence, the unity of this essence as being very low, right, it's something that is highly dependent and therefore one of the lowest judgments for Kant, and you could in some way compare them, so to speak. But again, the difference is the essence versus a judgment for Kant. For the a posteriori synthetic, right, this could be something compared to the genuine unities. And for this, von Hildebrand talks about, he uses water as an example. He uses a lion's mane he likes to talk about, especially with aesthetic unity. I won't talk about that. But the genuine idea about genuine unities is, for von Hildebrand, these are more given, right? These are not constructed. But there's a certain type of non-necessary unity in this, right? Because a lion's mane is still in some way an accident attached to a substance, if you want to use Aristotelian terms, right? And in this way, it's still given, but it's taken off of empirical induction to really get at the heart of this unity and to really specify into a genus and species, right? Take, for example, water, right? You have to really use inductive methods to kind of categorize the genus and species of elements and compounds, so to speak. So in this way, we could very much apply it and relate it to Kant's a posteriori synthetic judgment, right? Because that in itself is an empirical experience, right? But again, there's a difference for von Hildebrand. He's focusing on the essence. It's not so much my own judgment, but it's the essence that's determining these sort of judgments, so to speak, in Kantian terms, right? It's not that I make this judgment and it's built off of experience so much as it is for von Hildebrand. The experience is determined by the kind of essence you are encountering in experience. And we see this most strikingly in the final one, in what von Hildebrand calls necessary unities, right? Things that are, properly speaking, a priori synthetic, what he would relate to Augustine's eternal truths, right? Things that were before we are, right? These eternal truths, right? And for him, this could be moral values are presupposed in a person, the principle of non-contradiction. Properly speaking, independent of experience, but it's not so much the experience that determines it. Again, it's the encountering of the essence, right? The essence of moral values presupposing a person, right? Learning something new according to that is strictly necessary in any possible world, right? And you would even find this in the principle of non-contradiction, right? In any possible world, that is a truth that has to hold strictly necessary. And for this a priori synthetic, right, this has a necessary essence, and he has three attributes that he gives to it. He says it is strictly necessary, a strict intrinsic necessity, it is incomparably intelligible, right? It's intelligible immediately, right? Whereas with a morphic unity or genuine unity or chaotic and accidental unity, the intelligibility of it is not as clear, right? And for chaotic and accidental unities, it's actually very unclear. For genuine unities, it goes to empirical inductions to make it clear. But a priori is incomparably intelligible because it's intelligible immediately. He talks about it like this luminosity of the mind, which is a very interesting concept. As a side tangent, I have written kind of comparing von Hildebrand with Aristotelian a priori prior analytics, that's what it's called, and Bonaventure's Epistemology, founded in Journeying the Mind to God. It's a very interesting language, and I think it's very similar to Bonaventure's philosophy of light. That's just an interesting relation if you're curious. But right, according to this incomparable intelligibility, we have this, what he calls absolute certainty, which is an ambiguous term, I admit, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to say what he means by that is, I am certain of this truth, and I can posit that it is true according to just finding its truth in this incomparable intelligibility, this immediacy, and because it's strictly necessary and would be necessary across any possible world. Whereas certain unities, like morphic unities or genuine unities, and chaotic unities, right, don't necessarily have to be and could be different in a different possible world, right? So that is von Hildebrand's way. There's three unities, and you could make it a relationship to them, to the Kantian judgments, right? Like a priori synthetic. But again, to stress it, I've said it, I know a couple times, so it's probably getting old, but to stress again, for von Hildebrand, it's not so much encountering a judgment off of experience, it's the essence that you encounter that determines the sort of judgment it is, right? It's the essence that determines whether it's an a priori synthetic or something you could call an a priori analytic or an a posteriori judgment, right? So I think that's something crucial in von Hildebrand's epistemology, and that's what really distinguishes him from Kant and what makes him avoid Kantian idealism whilst still preserving and defending a priori synthetic, like Kant argued for. So, I know that was a lot. We talked about the ethics and the aesthetics and the epistemology of Kant and von Hildebrand, but I hope this kind of clarifies where von Hildebrand stands in those three categories of philosophy, and how he relates to Kant and opposes him, but also how he really builds off of Kant. So I hope that you find this video helpful, and I hope to see you next time. God bless.